So you're all very welcome to the Genspect FAIR webinar. We're co-hosting it, myself and Carrie. We're thrilled that Mia Hughes, the author of the WPATH Files Report, is here to talk about her experiences of writing the report, your insights, Mia, and really the takeaways that where are we going now? Because there's so much in this report. And I have to say, I think it's a brilliant piece of writing. But it's amazing it's got the light of day. We've all been waiting for this day for so long. So we very much welcome questions. We know an awful lot of people have an awful lot of questions. And this is our first webinar, series of 4, every Tuesday at the same time. You're all very welcome. Next week, just so you know, will be D-Trans Awareness Day, which is a special day in the calendar to kind of acknowledge the stories and the experiences of people who've been harmed by medical transition. And so we will have detransitioners on next week. But tonight it's all about Mia Hughes, the writer of the WPATH Files Report. First of all, I'd like Carrie, if you could introduce yourself, and then we'll move it over to Mia.
Okay. Well, thanks, Stella. I think a lot of people know me, but I'm Dr. Carrie Mendoza. I'm an emergency medicine physician. I'm in the Chicago area, and I'm the director of FAIR Medicine, where I work on advocacy in medical issues, depoliticizing medicine, freedom of speech, and obviously the gender issue has been one of the top issues that physicians have been scared to talk about, but want to talk about. So with that, I've gotten involved in trying to help this and stop the medical scandal. So that's me. And just a quick thing, Stella, we'll tell everyone to start putting your questions in the Q&A, because we are going to dive into those, super quick. And I know folks have a lot of questions. So,
yeah. Okay. We welcome questions. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm the founder director of Genspect, and delighted to be kind of having anything really to do with the WPATH files. It was an extraordinary moment when Michael first told me that he had these leaked files from WPATH, and it was the night before the conference in Denver, and it was like all the party kind of faded away. I was listening to him and he was talking about it, and I was like, what? You've got leaked files? And you've got a report? And it was like something extraordinary. And he gave a great talk the next morning. And I remember it was so inspiring because he started with the sentence, the name of my talk is How WPATH Ends. And really, over the last 24 hours, it really did feel like this is the beginning of the end. This is a game changer. So Mia, could you tell us, maybe from the beginning, when you first heard about the WPATH files, what you thought, how you shaped it? Tell us everything that brought you to be sitting here in front of us telling us about the WPATH files.
Okay, so Michael hired me in, I think it was last March or April or something like that. And I was writing for Public, his Substack. But then he pretty much right away got this pile of files, these documents, and shared them with me right away. And well, this was the original. They came in batches, and this was the original large batch. And of course, it was very, very broad range, WPATH being WPATH, but it was strange to see the internal conversations. I know I've written about WPATH a lot over the years, many of us have, but this was them on the inside talking about specific cases, dealing with the cognitive dissonance of detransitioners, and there was an awful lot of information in there. And so the original plan was to turn them into a series of articles for Public. And that didn't quite work out. There was too much information there. We couldn't do the files justice. So then Michael had the idea, after many months of trying, Michael had the idea to move me over to his think tank, Environmental Progress. And that's when I started working on the report. And also he had the idea that I could weave in medical history, because that's been my thing all along. Is when I first discovered this issue, it didn't make any sense to me. And to make sense of it, I turned to history. the past medical scandals, because that's just that's the only way I could make sense of it. So I put 4 past medical scandals into the report. It really took about 6 months to get it completely finished. And yeah, but what was there anything else? Have I missed anything?
No, that was perfect. I am very interested in the 4 past medical scandals, because I think you weave them in beautifully into the report, and I think they're indicative of what's going on. I think it does no harm for you to kind of just outline those scandals so that we realize what we're actually in. I think you do it very well in the report, but for people who haven't read the report, I think it could be nice for people to hear it. And as well as that, I suppose, I gather it was a very hard project. I know people who've had other kind of things. It just sounded like it was trying to put shape on something that was really, really difficult to pull off. And you really did get there in the end, but it took a lot of work.
It did take a lot of work, because I've never done anything like that before. And I'm so grateful to Michael. Like, he had the patience and the confidence in me to stick with it when it was not that easy at times, but we got there, and I'm really proud of how it turned out. But yeah, the past scandals, they make sense to me. The reason I chose the 4 that there's lobotomies is the obvious choice. Ovariotomy, which is the worst medical scandal of the 19th century, when surgeons were removing healthy ovaries from women to cure their madness, their insanity. Apotemnophilia, my favorite, the people who want the healthy limbs amputated, and then the scandal of treating adolescents, tall girls and short boys, with hormones to correct their height. And so in my mind, you can combine all 4 of them and you've got today's scandal. So, lobotomies was obviously a terrible, terrible crime, but it was done in a time when they didn't really have all of the treatments. If you were mentally ill back then, all of the treatments were just horrendous, or you were locked away in an asylum and then restrained. But with lobotomies, they hit on an idea and they ran with it without any proof that it was safe, effective, beneficial, whatever. And they destroyed a core part of a patient's humanity. This is, Freeman famously said it would leave the patients in a childlike state of dependency. So I liken that to the fact that, the surgeries that they're performing, the genital surgeries that they're performing are destroying a core part of these patients, their humanity. Your sexual identity is a really important part of who you are, and to destroy that in the quest to cure a mental psychiatric distress, I think is deeply misguided. The ovariotomy is actually my favorite case study, because there was a social contagion. There was this theory that in the 19th century that one organ could cause symptoms in another organ in the body. It was called reflex theory. And so they had this idea that the ovaries affected the brain, and there was a social contagion. Women imbibed that idea and then began fixating on their ovaries as the source of their mental distress. And then they would show up asking for their healthy ovaries to be removed, convinced that it was going to save them. And some of them did actually, they reported they were very satisfied and they felt that it saved their lives and made them much happier and stuff. And it's very like today, these girls, they're just imbibing the narrative of the modern trans rights movement, and they're fixating on their breasts and their reproductive organs as the source of their distress, and then they want them removed.
And it's notable, and I know you say it in the report, but many people with the lobotomies said they were happy they had the lobotomies. Many people with the you can get the pronunciation, they were happy with these, that they had these. I think regret is a very misunderstood and underestimated concept in people's lives. People don't face regret easily. People say, I'm still glad I married him, even when they had a terrible marriage because I had my kids or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? People don't face on, head on regret. Now, detransitioners would be the admirable exception. What was that what you found when you studied it, Mia? And you're welcome to jump in, Carrie, whenever.
I definitely, I mean, yeah, the people, there were people, some people were happy with their own lobotomy. More often it was the family were happy with the results of their loved one's lobotomy because it was the family who made that decision for their loved one. And when you've made such a decision, Megan McArdle puts it perfectly when she talks about the Oedipus trap. When you have made such a decision, you simply have to be right. These people made the decision on behalf of their loved one to have them lobotomized. And even if the results weren't great, they're hard. It's going to be really hard to say, we should not have done that. That was a terrible thing. Because then you have to face up to what you've done to your loved one. And I do think there might be a large element of that at the moment when these people are dealing with very serious complications and struggling in their lives, but they can't admit to themselves that perhaps it was all a mistake. That the sunk cost fallacy, the more you put into something, the less likely you are able to see that it was wrong.
Yeah, and you know, we kind of saw a kind of almost a shock of reality. We were all in Washington a few weeks ago when we were trying to kind of organize the launch of the files, and we met somebody. We don't have to say who, but we met somebody who said, "I was offered," you know, as she was one of those tall girls who was offered the hormone treatment. I hadn't heard of this. I'm a tall girl, and I hated being tall as a kid. So, yeah, this whole tall girls and small boys, do you want to speak a little bit about that? That had passed me by until I read it on your report.
Yeah, that one's really, really, I mean, the parallels are so strong on that one because it was pediatric endocrinology. So it's the beginning of endocrinology as a field anyway. They just developed hormones and they're just like trying to use them for anything they possibly can. And they come up with the idea to correct the height. So these are kids who are perfectly healthy. There's nothing wrong with them. And they want to, so they would use estrogen for girls who were predicted to be tall because it would speed up puberty so they'd have less time to grow. They, first of all, didn't know how tall there's no way of predicting the final height. So they don't know if it even worked. Maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. And then when they followed up with them many years later, two tall girls, actually, I think it was, who when they were adults, they decided to look into the scandal. And I think they found like 99% of the women whose parents had refused the treatment were happy that they had not had the treatment. And about 50% who had the treatment wished that they had not. And it caused, you know, all sorts of reproductive issues in later life. And it was a very distressing experience. And the short boys, it's even worse, though, because they were using human growth hormone extracted from pituitaries. They were harvesting pituitaries, basically from morgues all around the US. They had this weird thing set up where it was like a weird coalition between, what would be the word? A person who works in a morgue.
The coroner.
The coroner and pilots. So they had like a network of pilots who would fly the pituitaries in acetone to the processing plant, and then they would grind them up and inject the human growth hormone into the boys. And then like a decade later, the boys start dying of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is, it's like a prion, it's like mad cow disease. It lies dormant in the body for decades. Still to this day, they have those who are still alive have the death sentence hanging over their heads because people are still dying. Human growth hormone recipients are still dying of this CJD. And bringing it back to the fact that they were perfectly healthy children. There was nothing wrong with them. They didn't they were just correcting. They were engineering normality, I suppose.
Was this around the 60s, 70s kind of era?
Yeah, it started really early. It started in the 50s and it ran all the way, well, the whole experiment, 50s to the 1990s, but that was the tall girls. They stopped the estrogen in the 1990s. The CJD crisis hit in the 1980s, but when it hit, they didn't stop giving these kids human growth hormone. They just switched to a synthetic version. And there were signs, they knew about the risk of CJD for years before the first cases were presented. So when the inquiries were done, they set a date. You should have acted no later than this date. And I feel I wonder what the inquiries in the future will be. When will they say the medical world should have acted no later than this to prevent all of the harm that's coming to these children?
And you've seen that with the opioid crisis, Carrie, haven't you? Like, if you know, it goes with it, really.
Yeah. I think, well, there's that same parallel of, what problem are they trying to solve? They're trying to solve, human suffering. And, we see, like, as Mia was saying with lobotomies, I mean, they were coming off the heels of all the scandals from the asylums and the poor treatment. And that was before any of the modern antipsychotics were created, which the first one I think came to market in like 1951, that was discovered accidentally to have some effects of, dealing with some of the symptoms of psychosis. And so that led to that was the replacement theory, or the replacement. It led to the pharmaceutical revolution in that way. But before that, there a lot of people were, at wit's end in terms of how to best care for their loved one. So what I'm saying is it came from this place of, they thought they were, dealing with a solution that would be better than the terrible insane asylums. But then, again, it's this like human quirk to, you want it to be true. You're not looking at sort of the devastation, or it's like the trade-off there. They're saying, well, I guess, this is better than being in a terrible insane asylum, chained to a wall. And so you could see how there was that logic going on. And with the opioid crisis, it was like this idea of trying to do a better job controlling pain, sort of a perfect storm of a bunch of things, with a new medication, with aggressive, consumerism and marketing from a, big pharma company. And then some regulatory changes that were in place in terms of disability in our country, like more people could get on disability for minor things, on top of the regulatory state putting in the pain scale, which became mandatory and tied to reimbursements. So it became this perfect storm, and there was a mandate to treat people's pain and measure it. But what happened was the results weren't, the negative side wasn't paid attention to by all the people pushing what they perceived as the positive. So the feedback loop just was broken, where all these people got exposed to opioids who didn't need them, and people became addicted, or people who had addiction issues were exposed to them. And so we know how it took a long time to unwind. But I think, with, back to the report, and I think the historical context, I think there's that pull, like you want with your kids, you don't want your kids to suffer. Like, all of us have children, and, and in practicing medicine, there's, nothing more difficult than a child who is in distress psychologically, physically and psychologically. And so we know there's this perfect storm going on with sort of a cohort of kids who are unhappy. And we talked last night, like Abigail Schreier's book talks about that, and some different theories around why there's an uptick. But the reality is, when you're presented with an unhappy child, it's really, really difficult, and people want to help. And so I think it's gotten mixed in there with this idea that there is a gender issue, and then here's the solution, and then again, this pattern of like, well, we're not looking at what happens after the treatments, and we're ignoring any bad side effects. We're ignoring people that it doesn't work for. And those are all red flags, because they're, those are some of the patterns I think Mia, is seeing in these other scandals. And I think just, back to Mia, because we really want to hear, her sort of, when you're putting the files together, like your top, kind of what were some of the big, top insights for you, that someone who's been working on this issue for a long time, writing about it, but was like, wow, this is, really incredible. Were there, some?
Can I add to that?
Sure. Yeah.
Did you notice a theme of how the other scandals, how did they emerge? How did they come to light? How did we move it out of the mess that we're in now, if you follow me?
Because, how did they end, you mean?
Yeah, how did they end?
Well, I mean, lobotomies, we've already covered. The antipsychotics, the moment there was another option, lobotomies was over. Not for Freeman. Freeman went to his grave absolutely convinced that he had given a gift to humanity, and drove around looking, like tracking down all of his former patients and desperately searching for proof that the transorbital lobotomy was a gift to humanity and he had helped and not harmed.
He was very much like somebody who in the future, and I could think of a few clinicians who could just be like a true believer, that they truly believe there's some sort of inner trans identity within them, and that they know it's in them, and they'll go travel around the world convincing themselves that they've done the right thing by putting these terribly harmful, invasive and irreversible interventions in these children. So it's very similar, I think, of what we predict some of the clinicians will do.
Oh, no question. I'm not going to name any names, but I'm quite sure there are a few Freemans amongst us. Yeah, so ovariotomy is an interesting one. They took it too far. They got so carried away that a couple of asylums opened operating theaters in the asylum. And just that was just too much for what's really interesting about the ovariotomy one is people who opposed ovariotomy at the time were accused of being wanting in humanity. You were a terrible person if you did not allow these women to have their healthy ovaries removed, because it was deemed to be the cure. It's very similar to now. But then there was opposition. And when they opened the operating rooms in asylums, that's when it was just too much. And an inquiry was done into one of the asylums. And from that point on, people just turned against it, and it collapsed really, really quickly. Apotemnophilia never got off the ground. That scandal, I put it in, but it never got off the ground. It's really, I was talking about the isolated case of Dr. Robert Smith at Falkirk Royal and District Infirmary. And I think part of the reason it did not get off the ground was because it got very negative press coverage. This man was amputating healthy legs of people who just wanted to be amputees. And
can I point out Malcolm Clark? That's anybody who knows Malcolm Clark. He's the founder, certainly one of the leads in the LGBT Alliance, and he did a documentary about that issue for Panorama, I believe, and that's how he has such good insight into the gender thing, because he can see the similarity. But I suppose what's frightening about that was, again, it was the kind of the client leading the way, the client dictating it, but it didn't get off the ground because of the media. And there's an amazing kind of contagion that happened in 2012 in the town of Leroy in America. And these girls had do you want to talk about that? You obviously know about it, because it's extraordinarily similar, but the big difference was the media didn't run with it. Just like the amputees. The media didn't run with it. They got all excited. The town got all excited about these girls who had these tics. And the media, first of all, they came in, the media, and they, sorry, not the media, the doctors didn't get excited. The media got incredibly excited. And they thought, they brought in Erin Brockovich into the town to talk about these girls with tics, and they were convinced there was poison in the water, and the girls were getting tics, and next thing the best friend was getting a tic, and next thing 3 people in the class were getting tics. Next thing they were on, what was it, NBC, or the footage is still available of these girls with the tics. But the doctors didn't lose the head. The media lost the head. And as a result, it kind of died. Would that be your understanding of what happened, Mia?
Yep, that's exactly it. I think Erin Brockovich was convinced it was a train crash that had happened miles out of town years before, had somehow triggered these tics in these girls. People are really reluctant to go with the psychosomatic. In every psychosomatic outbreak, there's a reluctance to call it psychosomatic because nobody wants to be told that it's all in their mind, even though it's still real. It can still be psychosomatic and still be real. The symptoms are real. The experience is real.
In their mind, it's the body mind interacting, and it's so reductive to call it all in their mind. Even with these kids with their gender issues, they're feeling it. If you follow me, it's some people can be very dismissive. They're in distress. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Right. I mean, the gender dysphoria is real. They experience it. It's a real experience. It's just also a culture-bound. In my opinion, it's a culture-bound syndrome unique to our time and our place. It doesn't make it less real for the sufferer.
Yeah, and I think just like in my experience with working at the hospital and with the opioid crisis is that you know, I had that experience where people would call me a bad doctor because I wouldn't write them ridiculous amounts of opioids that they shouldn't have because it would kill them and they were already addicted and, you know, their lives were destroyed. So I wasn't going to jump in and be part of that. But it's extremely hard to say no. But the more that you do it, and the more you develop the language to talk with patients and families about it, and you're prepared that they might, you know, get angry or be upset. But the reality is they're ultimately, you know, you're doing the right thing by not making it worse. And, you know, we're in a time with consumer medicine that, you know, again, a lot of things at the hospital people want because it's like Dr. Google suggested it or something online. So, you know, part of being a really good physician for me in the emergency department is understanding how to talk to people about what they want as not being appropriate. You know, let me tell you why, and let me tell you what I think is going on and what we should do about it. And so I think that, Mia, I don't know where she went.
She's back. She's
going back. You know, but I think that's part of on you know, sort of getting out of this you know, terrible situation we're in with medicalizing gender distress is the, you know, language of the people who are prescribing, writing letters and doing surgery. Well, before they would ever get to the surgeon, the people writing letters and in the doctor's office dealing with a distressed child and parents understanding how to say no in the face of, you know, this unbelievable pressure that you don't want to be the person on the other end of someone, God forbid being unhappy and God forbid committing suicide. But that's, you know, we can get more into that. That's really been used as a blackmail to bully doctors and to bully parents. There's nothing in healthcare. People don't walk around going, if you don't do this, you're going to commit suicide. That's just a red flag right there. So
can I ask you,
yes,
Carrie, do doctors mention these other scandals that myself and Mia are very well known? You know what I mean? Do they mention them? Do they mention multiple personality disorder? That whole kind of scandal that happened in the 90s, or
yeah, I mean, people talk about it, but when you're, you know, actually practicing, obviously in emergency medicine, we're at the front lines of the mental health crisis. So I'm well familiar with people with multiple mental health issues and how do we handle that at the hospital. I think just more the near-term issues around overprescribing with opiates, and then just the polypharmacy, just people are on so many meds, too many meds prescribed by multiple people all over the place that they're not even keeping track of or do the same thing, and on top of, substance abuse, all kinds of things. So it's more in the ER, a culture of, not making things worse. And a lot of that has to do with trying to reduce the amount of prescriptions that people are on. But
I
yeah,
agree.
yeah.
I've noticed with so many of the families I've worked with gender issues, so many of the children are on other medications, psychoactive, psychotropic medications.
Yeah. I mean, that's a thing that just is so missing in the conversation. And of course, just back to the files, it's just like shocking. There's really no discussion of like the multiple medications people could be on and how that could interact with hormones or how those could be affecting their mood. One way, making it worse, because we do know that, a lot of the meds have never really been their trials for youth, et cetera. But I want to just go back to with the files, Mia, when you were trying to organize them, when you were trying to come up with like a thesis around organizing it and trying to explain it, because we were talking a little bit about this last night, and just in general, I think it's, part of this is trying to talk about this and discuss it in a way that's easy for people to understand, that isn't saying like, the confidence intervals or the sensitivity and specificity in the study was this or that, so that means that it's not real. It's like you did a great job creating, just explaining it in a narrative fashion and weaving in your examples to support your thesis. So maybe, you could just talk more about how your thought process, how you decided to organize it, how it came together, and some of the top examples.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, the two main there are now 4 parts. It ended up being 4 parts, but initially it was the not science and not medicine was where we started. The not medicine, to me, as a non-medical person, is, you think of medicine as first do no harm. And it seems so simple that doctors must try to heal or alleviate suffering and avoid doing harm. That's to their patients. And in the reading the files, it was very quickly apparent that these are people who are doing harm. And there wasn't really no one showed any concern about the harm that they were doing. So that section came together really easily, and I found it's all of it was difficult to write, to be honest. But if you look at in that section, we've got the harmful effects of hormones. So this is a completely unregulated experiment on very vulnerable young people. We don't know what the long-term effects of testosterone are on the female body. We do have some evidence because of the East German doping scandal, and those women didn't turn out. They suffered from many problems. And so in the files, there's the discussions about there's the liver tumors one, a teenage girl with large liver tumors her oncologist and surgeon think it's down to the testosterone, the hormones. And then the other person weighs in with an anecdote saying, oh yeah, I had a trans colleague who died of liver cancer after being on hormones for 8 years, and they think it was the testosterone too. And it's just, what if, well, first of all, Carrie can probably speak to this, but no one says, oh my goodness, we should look into this. This is urgent. What if we are setting up all of these young women for liver cancer later in life? Is that not something that actual doctors who care about the Hippocratic Oath would do, Carrie?
Right. And we've talked about this example before. When I first read that, I was just in shock. That's like a 4-alarm fire, you right away, oh my gosh, all these people are being exposed to this. And we, also we've talked about before, historically, we know from studying the history of hormones that there's a big association with cancers when they were experimenting with hormones for all different reasons. But they, have that historical amnesia. But when you see that, it's like shocking that they wouldn't immediately just want to alert their population exposed to this. So that just shows that ideological capture where they're just completely blinded to, again, it's not practicing medicine if you only think there's an upside. Like that's just right there as one of the giant red flags. There's nothing we do that doesn't have potential adverse effects, or no medicines that don't have a therapeutic window. Every medicine has a therapeutic window, that it can be toxic, it can be ineffective if you don't have the right dose, and it can be toxic. So it's just a tell right there, but it's just the lack of regard for people. They're not going to be seeing those people in the oncologist's office. They're not going to be seeing the people in the ER, at end of life. So it's just, yes. So that just was just so devastating to read that. But yeah, go ahead, Mia, with your other.
Yeah, I'll go through quick because I can go on for ages. The side effects, the less severe but still very debilitating, all the vaginal atrophy and everything, the way they're talking about that. Again, there's not a single person that shows up to say, oh, maybe giving testosterone to teenage girls isn't such a good idea. They're suffering all of these terrible side effects. It's impacting their lives. Maybe we shouldn't. Should we be doing this? No one says that. And then there's the erections that feel like broken glass. I'm sure that's not, that much fun.
People bleeding after sex and pelvic inflammatory disease seem to kind of be a huge issue.
Yeah, and it's the lack of, the lack of the it's not science part comes next, but it's the lack of nobody sharing any literature, scientific literature to say, oh, if you see a patient with that, you should do this, look at this is what we should do. And I recall there's one in the vaginal atrophy and the uterine atrophy, and it's about pain with orgasm, and one of them shows up and says, oh, well, I tried with 2 trans patients, have them take this medication like 30 to 60 minutes before orgasm, and you just think, it's going to take the spontaneity out of it, isn't it? It's like,
well, it's not. Again, that's just, yeah.
It's not seeing it for what.
Well, it's not. Yeah, it's not how real life should be. And then just again, the sort of your persona requires medicines in the medical community. I mean, again, mentally healthy people don't want to interact with the healthcare system. I mean, I don't know any patients that come to the, I just, so this idea that they need to constantly have medicines and interventions in order to live is just, again, another big red flag.
And I know for myself what jumped out of me on that subject. Lots of things jumped out of me in the WPATH files, but the procedures that were not known in nature really seemed to show that WPATH had become an organization that was kind of advocating for extreme body modification, and that when a surgeon came in looking for standards and protocols around these kind of extreme body modifications, such as minimal depth vaginoplasty and phallus preserving vaginoplasties and nullification, chest without nipples. When a surgeon came in seeking, maybe we should get a procedures and policies around it, was told by activists, oh no, that's a cisnormative way of looking at things. So there was the activist actually, the tail wagging the dog here, that the surgeon, who's highly qualified, is on a very good salary to take the responsibility to be a surgeon and is being shaped by ideological ideas such as it's cisnormative to look for a policy.
And I do believe he apologized for his use of language for being cisnormative, if I remember correctly. That's the thing that leaps out the most, really, when I say in the report that this is I think I say it's a political activist group masquerading as a medical and scientific organization. That's what I mean, in that in every conversation, you've got a weird mix of medical professionals and activists, be they transgender people themselves or human rights lawyers or whatever combination. And so a medical professional or a therapist will post a concern or an interesting case or looking for advice, and they get advice from trans activists or from people who have made these medical decisions for themselves. And therefore, you can't really have a real conversation. If there's someone in the replies who has gone down that medical pathway, that's it. You can't then debate whether it's right or wrong to go down that medical pathway, because you've got probably one or multiple people in the replies who have done it to their own bodies. And so this is not, again, I'm not medical, Carrie can answer this, but I do not believe this is how doctors talk in private on this type of forum.
Right, that's correct. And that came up a lot when we were all working on this as a common question. I think there may be one in the chat related to that. We've heard it a bunch of like, oh, this is just, doctors, clinicians shooting the breeze. Isn't this what you guys do? Well, no, this isn't what we do. One thing that you learn, at least in the excellent training I was lucky enough to receive, where I was trained in medical school and residency and fellowship, anything you write down is you've got to have it in the eye of that it could end up in court. You don't ever want to get sued and end up in court. I mean, aside from just how you're supposed to learn in terms of writing and expressing yourself and medical decision making. But then as we've gotten into the internet age and social media and chat rooms, and there's things in electronic health records where there's inter-doctor chats and between nurses and doctors where it's like, oh, hey, I ordered a Motrin for, I put new orders in for room 8 or whatever. But, people would write things in there, oh, the person has increased pain, this or that. But any type of forum, is you have to assume could be out into the public. And so that's one thing, but it's just how you conduct and present yourself. I mean, just some of the things in there should just be like, hey, wait a second, we need to alert people about this cancer. Oh, wait. You're taking care of a 13-year-old developmentally delayed young person who's puberty blocked, and now you're asking questions about the next step. Wait a second. Let's make sure here that everything is done correctly. Or just the fact they're putting those things in there shows a level of just, how poor the medical and decision making and everything is around this. And then the hubris to just be in there writing these things like, yeah, whatever, as if they have no guardrails, and they've really walked themselves out on a plank where seeing this, is just, no, doctors do not talk like this. It's a blatant disregard for patients. I mean, the discussions around, detransitioners and trying to resolve the cognitive dissonance in their head, where people are then saying, oh, it's just, well, I think it's, again, it's like the language games to convince themselves it's okay. Like, oh, well, if it's just part of the journey. I mean, to be able to think of somebody who has been harmed in this way and to talk about them like that. Okay, doctors, ethical doctors in normal medical practice do not talk like that. You don't just say, oh, gee, I'm sorry, I cut off the wrong leg. Oh, I'm sorry, I, accidentally caused, gave that person an allergic reaction by not paying attention to the allergies. Those are, that, nobody talks like that. So it's just a level of just really outside the standards of practice, which of course is ironic because they're, have put themselves at the center of the standards by, whatever perfect storm of things. And then our medical associations in our country and as well, in Europe, although they've, backed off and urged caution, but in our country, I think they just didn't do their homework and kept saying, oh yeah, WPATH, everything's fine. Nothing, we trust them. We're treating it as if it's the American College of Cardiology and they tell you this is the latest on treating a heart attack. Okay. But they just, sorry, Stella, so go ahead.
There's one doctor who says that in 15 years of practicing medicine, she hasn't refused anybody. Only one person got refused a kind of the letter to go ahead with medical transition. So it's kind of blanket affirming everybody of medical transition, which is what happens when you start allowing the clients to lead. And then that same therapist said that, or clinician said that, the only person she refused was in active psychosis in the office when she was actually, I shouldn't laugh, but it's so awful. And she regretted not allowing that person to go ahead for medical transition.
Right. She uses the word regrettably, and then she also, there's another key word in I think that very same comment where she says they only refused one, everyone else got their letter, and they all got at least an orchiectomy, so at least surgical castration, and everybody is living presumably happily ever after. And it's presumably, nobody's following them up. Nobody knows whether all of these castrated people are living long, healthy, happy lives. She's just assuming that they are.
And the only long-term study, from Sweden, I know it was, it's an old study, but it was out about 10 years ago, but it was over 40 years watching trans people and their lives. And it showed 19 times more likely to die by suicide compared to the general population. Now, granted, these are vulnerable people anyway, but that's the only long-term study of people who do medically transition. It's an incredibly difficult road to take. That's why Genspect has taken the position to advocate for a non-medicalized approach to gender dysphoria, because we looked at the medicalized approach and said it is fraught. We couldn't see how a doctor can recommend a medicalized life. You're on a medical leash for life. You're weakening your body with medical transition. You're burdening your body with a heavy medical burden for the rest of your life. Why not advocate for a non-medicalized approach? As far as, bodily autonomy is concerned, people maybe should be free to so long as they're not vulnerable, so long as they don't have mental illness, so long as they're not children or minors or adolescents. But it should be in extreme body modification clinics. This should not be in hospitals. It should not be as standards of care. Should not be a kind of a clinically acceptable kind of where doctors, this is extreme body modification. It's in the cosmetic clinics.
Yeah. And I just think that some of the plastic surgeons in there, honestly, to me, is it just in part, this is their, referral base and their pipeline, because when you go in the hospital and you're in the operating room, there's obviously, standards in terms of practicing cleanliness, different things like that. But, some of those conversations, again, just don't make sense medically. And in terms of homeless people and severe mental health, again, in the ER where I work, this is my population. Okay. So we can't get that to follow up for a normal appointment or just do normal things, because obviously they're so disorganized. They don't have a safe place to live. So they're not, they don't have a home, an apartment, they don't have a job. So the idea that would comport with doing this to them medically is back to falling into just, really egregious actions towards really vulnerable people who, don't have everything together to say, wait a second, no, this is wrong. I'm out of here. So, and I want to jump into the questions, Sasha. Yeah. There's so many, but one thing I did want to sort of transition into because this has come up also, Mia, we've been asked, and maybe is sort of the like, well, how do you know these aren't cherry picked, and how do you know maybe that there was a person like me saying something like these things and that stuff was cut out, so maybe you could speak towards like journalistic ethics and normal practices in terms of, the source or sources that that this stuff was given to Michael, and how is it that you verified that these were accurate? How do you know? Is this a cohort out of a larger amount, or just some of those issues? There's a few questions in there about that, so I think that's important to make sure we talk about, and I think you do in the report too. But
yeah, well, first of all, I don't know who the source or sources are. I don't know who provided the materials to Michael. Only Michael knows that. They are what is tacked on to the end of the report is the materials that we were given. So each conversation is a thread, rather like Twitter. There's somebody asks a question and then the replies come in, and they're screenshots of these conversations. We didn't take anything out. We didn't chop anything out. We did redact names, of course. And then
information. It was just redact names that were not known. You know what I mean? But the very well-known people were left in.
Yes. And then I wrote to everyone who was going to be named in the report. I very, very detailed write of reply emails telling them what they said in the files and what I intended to say about it, asking them for comment, and that didn't go down so well.
Do you want to say that? And then I'm going to read out Marcy Bowers, the president's statement. But you did write to everybody before we published, so go ahead.
I did. I wrote to everyone, and I only got one reply, and that was with a vaguely worded legal threat. Everyone else was actually ordered not to reply to me. The source provided Michael with a screenshot of the internal communication saying, "Don't reply to this journalist." So yeah, go ahead, read the statement.
Trying to read it. So WPATH President Dr. Marcy Bowers released this statement. WPATH is and has always been a science and evidence-based organisation whose recommendations are widely endorsed by major medical organisations around the world. We are the professionals who best know the medical needs of trans and gender diverse individuals and stand opposed to individuals who misrepresent and delegitimize the diverse identities and complex needs of this population through scare tactics. The world is not flat. Gender, like genitalia, is represented by diversity. The small percentage of the population that is trans or gender diverse deserves health care and will never be a threat to the global gender binary.
And then they make a statement that's going to be the statement for every inquiry or something like that.
It's moved from no debate to the world is not flat.
Right.
I guess it's progress.
Well, I would just like to say, I know Marcy Bowers is a physician, so I'm a physician. I'd like to just remind everyone that, first of all, this scandal is in a completely different phase. This is the end phase. It's widely out in the practice of medicine in clinics and in hospitals. So it's not about like theories, and it's not even arguing so much the different research papers, which I know research is important. I'm not minimizing that, but we're talking about medical practice and what malpractices and safety standards and the standards in hospitals and how we practice. And so when she says that, they know best, that's like, it has zero to do with a patient in front of you and you're charged with making a diagnosis and a treatment plan. And if your diagnosis is wrong, like that, psychological issues or distress could be treated by medicine, by pills or surgeries. Well, you made the wrong diagnosis, you have the wrong treatment, so you don't know best. So you have to be operating within the law. So that doesn't make any sense, because we know there's detransitioners who have been harmed and have had the wrong diagnosis. Okay, they're not the unhappy, the future adult trans person. So that's wrong. It's not addressed. And then diversity of patients, again, that doesn't mean anything. These are humans, and your job is to make a diagnosis, to treat them, make sure you're not hurting them. So what that statement makes zero sense in the practice of medicine. If she's talking about plastic surgery and elective surgeries in terms of elective, that's a different story, but they have gotten themselves to a place where they have said this is mandatory and essential, and therefore it has to be covered. So you can't be having elective surgeries and having them be essential and covered. The two things don't work. So the statement, doesn't make any sense medically for the phase that we're in, which is...
It reminds me of that comment in the files, you might not be binary, but hormones are. You know what I mean? It's kind of saying one thing and then saying the other, and you're like, what are you saying here? If you follow me, what were your thoughts, Mia, when you saw the statement?
I don't know that I should. I found the. Oh, hang on. What the part that stands out to me, gender like genitalia is represented by diversity. I don't know if this is your answer to the contents in the files. This is all you're going to say. They're not, that again, back to, they're simply not able to face up to the harm that they're doing. And I understand that, because I understand that once you've locked yourself into this pathway, it's really going to be so enormous for them to face up to the harm that they're doing. And so they make statements like this. And yeah. I think it's disrespectful to the victims of this scandal. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know where. I don't know how they roll this back.
And it's amazing, like WPATH, when you start studying it, and you give a really good history of WPATH in your report in the files, Mia, and it was this loose affiliation. It was a kind of a lunatic fringe organisation that were out on the edges, and they were called the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association, like the HBIGDA, and it was exactly that. It was just this extraordinary, unusual organisation that kind of looked after its own. They had trans people and they had clinicians for decades, from 1978 onwards. And then in 2007, it's extraordinary. A lot of things happened around then. The Yogyakarta principles happened then. And, they did this really clever marketing move by changing their name from the HBIGDA to WPATH, the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. And it seems like an influx of money happened around then. And it's extraordinary how much they polished up. It was obviously a perfect storm of social movements coming together, but they really, for standards of care, 7 and in 2012 and standards of care 8 in 2022, they were the Wild West by then. It was activists that completely infiltrated this organisation. I thought you did a really good analysis of that, but I'm talking too much, because we should be looking at questions, shouldn't we, Carrie? I can see what you're thinking.
No. I mean, that's such important. I do. People should look at that, what you wrote about with the history, because it's important to understand in terms of the evolution. But well, I thought just everyone could kind of look in and
while we're looking, I want to say that we've 1,500 people watching between all the different platforms. So we're basically bigger now than WPATH is, insofar as WPATH isn't that big an organization. They just have extraordinary funding and extraordinary power, because they were there decades before everybody else. Yeah. And it's an important thing to underline. But everybody, I saw that Saoirse put it in the chat, everybody's very welcome to register if they're interested in coming to Lisbon, where we're having a camp.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. we're following the counter conference idea. So they have a conference in Killarney, and so did we. They had a conference in Denver, and so did we at the same time. And now they have a conference in Lisbon in Portugal at the end of September. And you both will be speaking. By then, sure, WPATH will be old hat. But hopefully, the fast-track medicalization of identities will be shown up to be, how you phrased it in the report, Mia, a medical scandal that is along with the lobotomies and the other scandals that have happened. And it happens periodically to the medical profession, and it's happened again. And you saw the opioid, Carrie, and we've seen it. But when we go to a couple of questions, oh my God, there's loads.
Yeah. There's loads of them. I'm just gonna quickly kick off while you two are just looking for one to answer. But
how do we get this covered in mainstream media? I'll start with that. I think there's going to be I think the mainstream media are frightened. And they're frightened to comment. There has definitely been mainstream media comment. You know, the Daily Telegraph, the Economist, the Daily Mail. There's News Nation. You were on News Nation, weren't you, Mia, the other night? Newsweek. So there has been some mainstream, but I think they're frozen. They're scared, and there needs to be some courage. But courage is contagious, just like fear.
Yeah. I think there'll be more. I mean, I think that, again, we all grew up, I think just our institutions were intact, trusting them basically. And I think that, part of the story is that, people want to be helpful. They want to, they want to do good by patients. I think that the organization, again, a confluence of things started out like, well, let's figure out how we can do best in the healthcare for this population. And I think, but then they, figured out that again, one of the things is this isn't an inborn medical problem in the sense that it's something you go to the doctor, you have appendicitis or God forbid cancer, something to fix. If you need the medical community to make you happy and be your identity, that in itself is a problem. So the way they had to solve it is to get into the organizations in order to get the services covered by insurance, because it's very expensive. So to understand the other organizations, whether they've taken, leadership roles or just a confluence of things, have come along saying, oh yes, whatever WPATH says, we agree. But now they've gotten themselves into a box where when you see what's going on inside, the AMA saying, well, we agree with their guidelines. I would find it hard that people at the AMA would be, once they read through this and watch the video, would find that they would be endorsing this. Same with American Academy of Pediatrics and Endocrine Society. So, but I wanted to just only answer the one question that's come up a couple times about it's that thing people do like, well, yeah, cancer's bad, but it's just like, how do you know it's just not the one case they were mentioning? Okay, so again, in the practice of medicine, there's things called never events or sentinel events. You don't cut off the wrong leg or give someone an antibiotic that they're allergic to when it's flagged, or a medicine they're allergic to when it's flagged, severe allergy, anaphylaxis. And you don't go, well, it was just once, oops. Those are sentinel never events that are dealt with very, very strongly, because we don't want to hurt people. And the systems are designed to figure out, how did something like that happen? So it isn't so much about how do we know there's only like one case or two cases of cancer that were mentioned. It's the fact that that is a never event. One is too many. That's what the answer is. Okay. So moving
as well, but as well, how do we know it's not more than one event? It's the point is that these young people are perfectly healthy, physically healthy, and the first line of treatment is to give them drugs that could potentially cause liver cancer and all the other side effects that come with it. The point is, if you don't know for sure that this is safe, it should not be the first line of treatment. You should be taking the least invasive approach first, which would be the psychotherapeutic approach, not leaping straight into hormones.
Yeah, of course. And then, additionally, I did training in medical toxicology. So just this whole idea of like, we're just, using doses to titrate to like effects of this, that, the other thing is anathema, obviously, again, to medical toxicology and just the practice of medicine. We don't know what doses, for how long, when, what else it's mixed with. So yes, thank you for mentioning that. But I did also want to make sure people understand that there are never events and sentinel events, and they're just things, you just don't cross that line. But because of that tracking, we don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
Here, I'd like to address.
Yeah.
Says, where do you think things are going from here? I'd love it if my daughter's affirming therapist and physician. I'd love it if my daughter's affirming therapist and physician reach out to say, you know what, we were misguided. Let's put the brakes on this and go deep in therapy. But I don't see this happening, certainly not anytime soon. What would you expect to see clinically in the near term? I think people can take it upon themselves that if you are aware of clinics near you, if you're aware of hospitals near you, if they have WPATH in their guidelines, if they're talking about international best practice, they're talking about WPATH standards of care, and that you write to them. You write to them and encourage other people to write to them saying, you know what, the WPATH files have been released. I encourage you to have a look at this. It proves that it's not a scientific nor medical organization. You said there was 4 parts to that. Was there other ones you wanted to say, Mia, about that? I don't remember.
Well, it's not scientific, it's not medical. Then there was the no respect for medical ethics. And that was when I went into the non-binary surgeries and the customized bodies that don't exist in nature. And the other one was just WPATH has misled the public. And that's the opening one where they're just talking about how they know that teenagers can't understand lifelong sterility and all the rest of it. But in the sort of carefully crafted public image, they advocate for teenagers to be sterilized.
Yeah. And we now have the proof. We now have the files, and the files should be brought up every single time with clinics, with hospitals, every time. And somebody says international best practice, I'll stop you there. They have been discredited as an organization. Another interesting question that came up, and I thought this was raised an interesting point that I think you can speak to, is could there be a chance this would get the major medical organizations to use this as an excuse to wiggle out of their straitjackets? Something like, we were on board before, but with this new information, along with all those global systematic reviews and research pieces from all the different countries, we need to revisit our support of gender-affirming care. And presto, bingo, hey, we now realise this is not a good thing. Now, I just want to give my tuppence worth on this. I hope they do. I will be furious. I will be one of those bitter people that remembers it beyond decades, beyond anybody else. And I probably will continue talking about it. But I still hope they stop. I don't care how they stop. I want them to stop because they're causing harm. And any way they cause harm, they can stop is a win for me. What do you think, Mia or Carrie, on that?
Well, we're talking about major medical associations. Is that what we're talking about? I mean, it's got to be pointed out that the Endocrine Society, their 2017 guidelines were the committee for those guidelines was about half WPATH members and rather prominent ones too. And they're revising those guidelines. And I think the head of the committee is a very prominent WPATH member. So there's a massive overlap with some of them. There's lots of medical organizations, and I don't know how many have this huge overlap. So I don't know. Hopefully others will. Carrie, do you think this is likely?
Well, I can tell you from what happened with the opioid crisis. I mean, the AMA never apologized for their role in basically collaborating with Purdue Pharma to create quote unquote standards inside the hospital where you had to measure pain. So I think the goal is to the degree to which they have influence, to get them to stop exerting that influence in the direction of this continued harm. But do I think they'll officially say, oh, I'm sorry? No. I think there's a chance like a lot of things get rebranded. I mean, in emergency medicine, we have this thing where, all the nursing homes around us are all the same, but about every 3 years, they all have like different names because they close and someone else like buys them. So, but it's the same stuff going on. So I don't know. I mean, I do think though you show that again, that important point that that there's a conflict of interest because the folks that are just, in WPATH are in these medical associations who then are at the regulatory level and culturally exerting pressure. We know that for the AAP, the guideline, the sort of policy statement that was written, I mean, you could call it whatever, but people point to it and kind of use it as a practice guideline or something to shield themselves behind, was written someone just out of residency who now is named, in a lawsuit. And so those things are super important to understand the influence of WPATH's role. And it's almost like, I hope one thing that comes out of this is, there are all kinds of laws related to pharmaceutical reps not being able to like be in the hospital and sell things. I mean, it used to be the Wild West, taking doctors on junkets. And it was kind of like, oh yeah, well, of course I'm going to be prescribing your drug. But what happened is the regulator said, oh, that's bad. And so I think that our day and age, one of the lessons is going to be that advocates, it's like they're pharma reps. They shouldn't be, there needs to be separation. They shouldn't be inside an association. They shouldn't be on these major boards, et cetera. So anyways, but continue on. We have
there's so two comments I'd like to read out because I think they're interesting. Yeah. It seems there's a different metric at play. It seems like it's not about dealing with a defect or even taking away pain. It's almost as if normality is pathologized. Everything must be chosen. Everything must be authentic. Like it does feel like we moved into a conceptually strange world when people started to kind of choose their bodies and choose their identities and create them with medical kind of medication. And then somebody said, I think it's foolhardy to believe that the trans explosion is about the need to relieve psychic pain. I'm more inclined to believe that fetishists realised that they needed to rename their condition to gain respectability and social power. I'd like to comment on that a little bit because it was very interesting. There was kind of a trans explosion in the 1960s and 70s. It was very small numbers, but it was certainly there. And then, two things, a couple of things happened. But Dr. Paul McHugh really kind of chased after John Money in Johns Hopkins Hospital in the 1970s and decided, if I'm right, in 1979 to shut down the Gender Identity Clinic, whatever it was called at the time, saying that these people were not being improved by their medical transition. So that was one thing. And then the HHS stopped offering insurance for medical transition in 1980. And that didn't start up again until, if I'm correct, until 2014. And it seems to me that, this second comment is that, yes, a group of people who seem to be driven by paraphilias set about playing a very long game. And they ended up putting the T in with the LGB. They ended up changing in 1996. They ended up changing the word transsexual and transvestite and amalgamating it into transgender. Then we're going on to 2007. They had the Yogyakarta principles, which nobody was looking for except themselves, and they created them, stuck them in. Then they renamed the HBI GDA into WPATH. And you think, whoa, long game was played and an extraordinary amount of structures were put in. So I think it's true. But at the same time, I personally think, I'd be interested in what you think, Mia, but I think then a social contagion happened on the internet that was about psychic pain, and this was lost, lonely, very often autistic, sometimes gay or lesbian, teenagers found a community. It was like a perfect storm of identity was offered to them. What are your thoughts?
I'm very much with you on that. I mean, I do think that, yes, the autogynephilic men really, really typically do not accept or they don't want to admit the existence of autogynephilia. They don't want to admit that they are autogynephilic for obvious reasons. And yeah, so the gender identity, they create this concept, or they rejuvenate the concept of the gender identity, and then it's then you don't have to talk about autogynephilia. You just have a mismatched gender identity. I do not believe that anyone set out to trigger the social contagion. I don't think anybody was out there cunning plan to create all of these patients and trans all these kids. I think that it arose organically. I've written about it endlessly on Twitter, how when the trans rights movement really ramped up the messaging and pushed the concept of the gender identity into schools, into the media, blasting messages at them left, right, and center, right at the time when smartphones and social media came along, which provided the perfect super spreading environment, a whole lot of really troubled kids who were not thriving, kids who were having a hard time, just got sucked into this. And then the social contagion started. So it's really, all of the people who are lumped under the category of trans and deserving of medical transition. What does a middle-aged man have to do with a 13-year-old girl? A middle-aged man who, perhaps has autogynephilia and wishes to transition. He has nothing to do with a 13-year-old girl who is distressed and hates her body and has come across the idea of gender identities and trans online. They're not the same patient cohort at all, but they're all lumped together.
Yeah. I see that Alison Clayton's paper is mentioned in the questions, and this is a great paper called "The Gender Affirmative Treatment Model for Youth with Gender Dysphoria: A Medical Advance or Dangerous Medicine." It asks, and it's 2022, and it does go through some of those historical examples. Somebody asks, I wonder, can we answer? Did WPATH run research programs? Was there any discussion or reference to papers and research that shows what or who research that was guiding WPATH in their recommendations?
That's one of the. That's one of the things that's notably absent from the discussions is papers, scientific papers. Honestly, the only ones I can think of are, there's a very prominent trans rights activist who churns out a lot of papers that are some of the craziest things you could ever read. And if somebody's got a doubt about a particularly challenging, like the 13-year-old developmentally delayed autistic or whatever child who wants to progress to cross-sex hormones, one of those the activist plunks one of their own papers into the replies to help the person who's unsure how to deal with this kid. And the paper basically just says children know their gender identity better than their parents, so they should have access to medical transition. I don't recall any papers. No, hardly anything. It's all anecdotal. It's all guesswork. It's all making it up as you go along. It's very little science.
I'm going to jump in and answer one. Our friend Tabia Lee was asking about the importance of something such as a detransitioner Bill of Rights, which, our friends at Do No Harm, who do a lot with legislation and policy, I have an initiative and working on that to get that into state houses and legislation. And, that's really, really important because, there's so many different tentacles to this. And with that comes different ways to stop it. And in our country, in the U.S., making sure that the victims of this have, are hooked into what is the business of medicine in our country, so that have insurance companies are obligated to cover them for the different harms and issues that they're going to have. That is just critical, just as a human rights issue, but secondly, as part of the backstop on this, because again, right now there's just this one side, like, just transition, and but if insurance companies have to also pay for the other end, you're going to see some discipline there, as well as, malpractice reform where they're extending out the window is critical because, as we know, there's a honeymoon period that can vary quite a bit based on the different interventions you had. At FAIR, we've been working on getting, and then, this isn't like the most exciting, thing, but getting billing codes for detransitioners, because in the business of medicine, if you don't have a billing code, which again, the AMA controls, and there's these various subgroups it has to go through, you don't exist because they miscode you as some other thing. So that's wrong ethically, but then how can we count properly these young people and the different problems they're going to have if they don't exist? Like when COVID came on the scene, they had to create new billing codes. Didn't mean we weren't taking care of them, but before they created the codes, it was just like viral syndrome, and so anyways, but thank you, Tabia, for mentioning that. I mean, the detransitioners, and we're going to have them next week, as Stella mentioned, it is so critical, and we'll talk more about all of that stuff, but yeah.
We're coming up towards the end. I want to remind people that next week is D-Trans Awareness Day. Please spread any news you can about D-Trans. There'll be loads of things on the internet. Genspect has loads of things. Beyond Trans has loads of things going out. Loads of just different events, interviews, some amazing piece of animation and things like that, artwork. But as well as that, we'll be here and we'll have a panel of detransitioners, and we'll be talking about the WPATH files again. We'll be here every Tuesday for the next. We've got over 2,300 in total looking at us between Twitter and YouTube
and what number is Michael's Twitter up to? The WPATH?
Oh God, it was over 3 million, the last 3 million views, but I don't
under 24 hours, right? So yes, but next week we'll be here with Laura Becker, who's a wonderful young lady, brave, and then Abel Garcia, a young man, and Forrest Smith, who's also a wonderful young man, and they'll talk about their experience, because we, to think of them reading this information and reading these and seeing these doctors say these things and what was done to them, and all the families devastated by this, and young people, it's just it's just heartbreaking. So
I saw some really harrowing comments from detransitioners today, just really sad, and some families, some parents just saying just how my life has been devastated by gender ideology, and just to watch the cavalier, the flippant comments, the awful video where people are laughing at the most vulnerable people. I do want to address these two, but maybe you might think of anything you want to finish off with, Mia, about the files, or anything you'd like people to know. But these two comments I think are very important. Are the files and analysis organised in a form that will be useful to malpractice attorneys in the immediate future? And the answer is yes, they are. Yes, these are a very organised format. And yes, we have no doubt, and we encourage any malpractice attorneys who might be seeking to use the information in the WPATH files, because we do think it's very important that there is legal action taken around this, and more. And another one, how are malpractice carriers responding to this? It's clear that proper informed consent is not happening in any of the clinics medicalising patients with gender distress. These providers are a liability aside from practising sloppy medicine. So even from an economic standpoint, I'm surprised this has been allowed to go on for so long. And yeah, we're all surprised, but it came in like a rocket, and it took many of us years to figure out what was happening. So there was a research phase where everybody went to the research to figure out what was going down, and was this research backed up? And then it took a lot of real, very kind of academic people to say, no, this is really shoddy research. It's based on clay. They're self-referencing each other. They're laundering information. They're using studies with 6 people or anonymous online surveys. This research is really, 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 really unreliable. And now we've gone into the dissemination phase, the talking to the public, the hearts and minds, talking to the culture, and saying that people have been misled, like you so eloquently put it, Mia, with the lobotomy, with, the ovariectomy, is that right? And different other medicals, multiple personality scandal also comes to mind. Different scandals have happened before. They'll happen again. We're right in the middle of one now, and it's coming to light. And it's our job. I think it's everybody's job now. Write to the clinics, write to the schools, say you've got WPATH on your books, and they've been discredited by these leaks. Would you like to finish it off, Mia, and maybe Carrie as well? What are some last words about the files or about your thoughts on it?
Well, you go ahead. No, you go ahead, Mia.
Well, no, Stella put it so well. I just it's a medical scandal. Talk about it, share it, and share it with, for me, schools, doctors, whatever, but people that you know as well, because you just never know who's got a child that's about to plunge into this. And people make really drastic, life-altering decisions on behalf of their children based on their trust, this broken chain of trust that I wrote about. Like, they trust WPATH. So getting the word out there, the truth about this organization, I think is really, really important. And I'm really grateful that everyone showed up tonight, so many people.
Yeah, 2,300 last count. Anything you'd like to say, Carrie? And we might see you all next week.
Yeah, I don't have more to add. You guys did great. Just for folks to show up next week, make sure people are aware of the report, and really thanking Mia for just all her hard work, doing it, writing it, incredible. And of course, we're very thankful to Michael, who, recognized this as an issue, and using his platform to reach other people. So, and thanks to Stella, of course.
Yeah, there's so many people to thank, but Mia and Michael, you really do stand up, as you've been through an extraordinary year, I'd imagine. And it's lovely to see the fruits of your labor getting the recognition it deserves. I'm thrilled for you, because it's a great piece of work. It really is. I'm looking forward to the book.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Okay, bye.
Bye.